Jackal Among Snakes. Author, Nemorosus. Chapter 191, Coerced Confessions. Orion pushed Duran forward. The tribal moved with the push, turning and sitting on a chair ahead of him. The chair tipped to one side from the force, but Duran put his foot down and got his balance quickly. The prince stepped around Duran as he sat there, catching his breath. Duran stayed quiet as Orion walked around him, turning his head to ensure the prince was always in his sight, even if only just. There was one thing that life had taught him: you could always say more later, but words spoken can't be taken back. He stayed quiet, waiting, despite the fact his insides were turning with nervousness. The image of Drezki's skull being crushed played in his head again and again, and he found himself watching Orion's hands. Orion had taken Duran into one of the deepest parts of the abandoned keep. Here, much of the walls had collapsed entirely, but overgrowing plants gave the illusion that they were still inside. He could hear dripping water somewhere, but beyond that, there was only his own breath and Orion's steady pacing. Some water had flooded the place, causing the occasional splash as the prince's feet fell. Time passed like this for what seemed like an eternity. Orion simply walked around Duran time and time again, grey eyes staring down at him coldly. Duran thought nearly half an hour had passed, but he still stuck to his plan of saying nothing. The prince knelt down before Duran, placing his face so close he could feel his breath. It startled him, and Duran reeled back his head. "Did you kill my brother?" Orion asked simply, voice a low whisper. Duran tried to speak, but his voice failed him. After swallowing, he said, "No." Orion moved his hand forward slowly and wrapped it around Duran's neck. His fingers were uncomfortably long. "I can feel your blood flow. Every beat of your heart. It will tell me if you lie. I'll ask again. Did you kill my brother?" "No," repeated Duran, neck tight in apprehension. "Did you have anything to do with my brother's death?" Orion pressed, fingers steady as steel. "No," Duran said again. He swallowed, Adam's apple pushing against Orion's hand unpleasantly. Orion stared straight at Duran's eyes, and both held their gaze unflinchingly. The prince's stare seemed to be piercing into his soul. Orion's fingers straightened, releasing Duran from their grip. "I couldn't actually tell anything from that," Orion confessed in a dire whisper. Duran blinked in a mixture of confusion and shock. Orion put his hand on his knee and remained kneeling in front of Duran. "Are you truly a faithful of Vaska?" Duran hesitated only a beat before answering, "Yes," with a slow, steady nod. The prince's jaw clenched. "Were you always?" "No," Duran answered quickly. Orion stood, staring down at him. "Why did you abandon your old faith?" Duran stared up at the prince, blinking as he considered his answer carefully. "Because of Argrave," he said, hoping to use that man as his saving grace. Duran was hanging on by a thread. It felt like Argrave had told him of some of the gods of Vaska in case he had to interact with Orion, but the information didn't stick well. He knew little of the Vaska faith, any of its gods, or its religious practices. He barely knew his own people's gods. All he knew was that Foolhunt trampled upon his people, and the gods were not his friend. All he could hope was that Argrave's name might keep this man's wrath away from him. "What did Argrave say to you?" Orion grasped Duran's chin, angling it upwards. Duran took more time to think, then answered in staccato speech on account of his held chin. "Not what he said. What he did." Orion pulled Duran forward, and the tribal strained, standing up off the chair. "What did he do?" Orion insisted. Duran put his hands on Orion's wrist and managed to loosen his chin enough to speak normally. "He killed a herald for the strongest god in the burnt desert, Foolhunt, the god of rain and floods, an ancient god. And more than that, he saved my life." The prince released Duran, and he collapsed back onto the chair ungracefully. "Who did he kill?" Orion questioned. "Coerced, the Lord of Silver," Duran said honestly. "He also got others to kill yet more. The Lords of Copper and Gold both died by him, even if indirectly." "Yet why did you abandon your faith?" Orion knelt once again. "Because I lost faith," Duran said quickly. "If it is lost already, you cannot be a true faithful now," Orion growled. "Argrave brought it back." Duran leaned back. The words came easily, unlike the other lies about his faith. But then, Duran thought it might not be a lie after all. The man had defended him so readily against Orion, even saying he was like family. He had faith Argrave didn't want him dead, at the very least. Orion stared down Duran. "How? What did he say? What did he do?" "Too many things." Duran shook his head. The prince kept his stare steady for another uncomfortably long while. Then, he sat down, uncaring of the slightly flooded floor beneath him. "Tell me," Orion commanded. Duran did not return that day. Argrave's shame at being incapable of stopping Orion from doing whatever he pleased clung to him like a disease. Though the prince had said some time ago he envied Argrave's ability to persuade people, the reality remained that this weapon had failed him entirely. Duran was taken elsewhere because of something that Argrave had wanted him to do, and he could do nothing to stop that matter. Worry made him nauseous, though he floundered about for a time after, searching for solutions that did not exist. Only one thing eventually offered him any comfort: studying the B-rank spell, Bloodflood Bow. The past few days' eagerness to breach the barrier to a higher rank of magic morphed into an obsession, fueled by his feelings of humiliation, self-loathing, and powerlessness. Argrave sat just outside Orion's keep. the spellbook in his lap as he studied the matrix it conjured. Though Guilliman and Annalise both attempted to pull him from the task to seek rest, he stubbornly refused to listen. After a time, even Annalise gave up the idea of persuading him, and merely stood guard as Argrave studied. The day passed, and then the night, but he refused to move. The Wax Knights and the refugees seemed to interpret it as a protest, or a proclamation of innocence. Argrave didn't care what they thought of it. The morning came and continued on into the noon. As Argrave mired himself in angry thoughts of all kind, Guilliman standing a fair distance off to the side, someone emerged from the keep. When he saw golden tattoos, his head swam with haze. His tired eyes could barely stay focused, but he recognized the man. In one motion, he cast aside the book and ran towards him. His eyes checked many spots, searching for injury. Darren, you. What the hell did that guy? I mean, what? Darren held both of his hands out. Do not put a damn hand on me. If some giant moron with big hands touches me once more, I'm going to lose my mind. Argrave frowned, perplexed. He's insane. Something that makes humans human is just missing with that guy. Darren pointed back towards the keep. Good gods. All night we talked. All night I kept thinking about Dresky's skull getting crushed. What did he ask about, then? Argrave pressed. Your travels, mainly. Darren pointed towards Argrave. My travels? Argrave repeated, perplexed. His gaze went to Guilliman, then Annalise. He might talk to you, next, then corroborate the story. Guilliman crossed his arms, nodding. He seemed ready. He has insisted I come to him daily for lesson on the Vaska Pantheon. Darren crouched down by the mud. What did I do to deserve this? Argrave looked down at Darren, feeling great sympathy for the man. Then, his reason resurfaced. He stepped over the crouching Darren. Did you have anything to do with Magnus' death? Darren looked up at him. Do you think I have soup for brains? I hope you're saying that because you're tired. Otherwise I'm going to bash my head against a rock until I pass to this promised land Orion speaks of. So, no, Argrave concluded. Of course I had nothing to do with it. Darren stood. If I'd known things would end like this, I would never have agreed to this stupid request. Finding out Magnus' stupid motivations. Argrave put his hand on his hip. You offered to do this, as I recall. Choke on your tongue. He threw his hands up in frustration and stepped away, shaking his head rapidly. Argrave watched Darren's back as he paced about, kicking stray leaves and stones in frustration. He looked at Annalise. He felt the urge to hold her, like she was a feather that could be blown away by any stray wind. This event served as a reminder that he was still fallible, and he needed to learn it well. Darren received the harsh treatment, not me, she reminded him. Argrave sighed, nodding. He was not content inside, though. Never again. That thought ran through Argrave's head again and again, like some mantra vested in him. Never again. You must have the power to say no. If Darren died because of me, Guilliman, or Annalise, I don't think I could go on. Argrave had been repaying the debt to Erlebnir diligently, and he suspected he'll have fully repaid the debt in 2 more days. Still, even if he had that power back then, he would have been powerless before Orion. Things ended without incident. This time, Orion returned Darren without harming him. But Argrave had another goal. Now, he had to make sure something like that could never happen again. He'd been too lax, too content. He had gained much, and that had led him to rest on his laurels. He had to ensure that nothing could take from him. Argrave's gaze refocused, his tired golden eyes lit with a veritable flame as steady as a pilot light. He looked at Darren who still fumed and questioned, what did you learn from Magnus? What does it matter now? He's dead. Darren turned his head back. Darren, Argrave said patiently. Darren turned round. I found out that nearly everyone should be glad he's dead. I found out a bunch of knowledge about your family. I found out some very uncomfortable things, like which mushrooms in this swampland make you hallucinate. Beyond that? Darren threw his hands up once more. Nothing, not a peep of your Galactic Kiat. What am I, a mind reader? How am I supposed to find that out? Argrave said nothing, thinking of the implications. Too much was amiss here, and much of it felt like active sabotage. The fact stood, though, that there was nothing Argrave could do presently to weed out the truth. With his mind settled, Argrave nodded. All right. I don't know what this means for the expedition, and I suppose all we can do is wait. Ideally, things will proceed as planned. With Orion, I don't know if that will happen. Argrave shook his head. I'll try to press him into hurrying this along. If word of this reaches in June, he might come out here. For now, we should stay near Sylvic, ensure that Orion... Argrave trailed off as he spotted a flash of gold outside their ward. One of the Wax Knights roamed about the camp, clanging a ladle against a pot and shouting. It was muffled from beyond the ward, and Argrave dispelled it at once. Gather in the square. Gather in the square. Our Holiness, Prince Orion, wishes to speak. Gather in the square. The man shouted again and again. A wave of nervousness passed through Argrave. It seemed that Orion had come to a conclusion. Considering they had not been seized, that spoke well of his half-brother's decision. Argrave gave a gesture and led the 4 of them towards the square before Orion's keep. A great gathering of people already waited. They could not exactly blend in with the crowd. When people noticed them, they moved away. It was a great irony that the diseased shied away from touching them. But Argrave was not complaining. Soon enough, Orion emerged from the keep. He stepped to the head of the crowd, though the cheers that met him were not as unanimous as they always were, like some heavy anticipation had set over the crowd. Orion's gaze wandered the crowd, and soon enough, all grew silent. His grey-eyed gaze lingered on Argrave for half a second, then jumped away. Prince Orion stepped back and shouted, "People, yesterday, my brother, born of the same father, born of the same mother, was found murdered," he declared. Silence met his words. Orion held his fist to his mouth, and he appeared to be holding back tears. Then, his grandiosity returned as he moved around, shouting, "There are some who have come to this camp recently, that many believe may have had a hand in this." Again, Orion's gaze stopped on Argrave for a passing moment. "But I listened to them. I listened to those who were accused. I listened to the gods, communing with them all through the night." Orion bit his knuckle, falling silent. Then, he said quietly, "The gods told me to ask who benefited from this." "And what I came to." Orion stared at Argrave directly. "This time, our enemies sought to sow disunity. They sought to throw us into disorder, to cast our unbreakable will against the earth that it might shatter. Indeed, I say it plainly, our enemies are behind my brother's murder. They fear the wrath my brother and I bring upon them." The crowd came alive for the first time, some cheering. "I will not allow the grasping tendrils of the enemy worm itself into our burgeoning crusade. The sum of their efforts will be delaying our righteous wrath by a mere day." Orion held his hands up and decreed, "Tomorrow, my brother and I will lead a force into the depths of the wetlands. We will strike down the enemy, and all you will be freed of the great malevolence which racks your bodies even now." As though given permission to cheer, the crowd frenzied. Orion stared up at the sky. When the prince spoke again, his voice seemed to split the air, so loud it was. "And as for my brother," Orion strode towards Argrave. The crowd had moved away from them, and so there was nothing preventing him from doing so. Argrave stepped ahead of his companions, coming to stand just before Orion so that they were not so near to him. Orion stared at Argrave, gazes locked. The man was still larger than him, still as intimidating as ever. Yet for the first time, Argrave felt no fear. The prince fell to his knees. Then, he bent forward, slamming his head into the ground. He was kowtowing. Argrave realized. "Brother, I apologize for my distrust," he shouted, voice splitting the air even still. As Argrave stared down at him, he could not deny he felt some of the emotions that had been brewing the past 24 hours urging him to step on Orion's head. But Argrave sighed, then knelt down. He grabbed Orion's shoulders and corrected his posture. "We have work to do, Orion," he said levelly. "It's an early day tomorrow." His words were those of peace. But as Annalise gazed down at Argrave, concern was evident on her face. Chapter 192, Foolhunt begins. Argrave slept little that night, enough to function without issue, but not much more. All of his time was spent studying the spell, Bloodfud Bow. The how of things still eluded him. The B-rank matrix felt fragile, and his attempts to put it into motion simply made it break. It felt like he was trying to pick up a house of cards and move it elsewhere. It didn't matter how he distributed the force, or if he applied it evenly across the whole thing. To set the spell matrix into motion was to break it. Despite his failures, he was not discouraged. "Never again," he repeated mentally time and time again. He could never again relax, never again fall into contentment. Everything could be taken from him in a heartbeat if he was not adequately prepared. The expeditionary forces were rallied early in the morning. Orion brought with him 10 of his wax knights, and Argrave brought his 3 companions, plus Sylvic. In total, that placed them at 16. All had plenty of rations. Orion brought a weapon along. It was an ornate flanged mace made of black metal and gilded with snakes on the shaft, and thoroughly enchanted. Orion distributed backpacks full of rations to all, including Argrave and his companions. They had been diligently gathered and preserved. The wax knights accompanying them were C-rank mages, one and all, and seemed to be skilled with their blades. The morning was spent by Sylvic, in truth, Annalise, scouting out a proper path. The obfuscation was paranoid caution on Argrave's part, concealing some of their abilities in case they needed them. Annalise marked the trees in the vast wetlands ahead with her star sparrow. Argrave repaid some of his debt to Erlobne. The first hours of the journey would be safe, he knew. He would likely regain his ability to use the blessing of supersession the next morning. After their preparations, "If you stray too far from me, my power wanes." Barring Orion, perhaps, all will die. "The wetlands themselves will consume you in hours, and none will find your body," Sylvic cautioned. "How dangerous can it be for Knights of the Faithful?" A wax knight rebuffed. Sylvic turned her head towards him. "I will not make you believe me. I see no reason to stop you from killing yourself." Orion crossed his arms. "Heeds the spirit's words." "We are allies against evil," he commanded. "Then we may go whenever you are ready," Sylvic directed. Orion stepped away, peering through the trees into the vast wetlands beyond. A cold morning mist blocked much vision ahead. This fog seemed different, somehow. The wind did not affect it. "Oh gods," Orion sung. "As I walk through hardships, protect me, your lordships." Orion stepped ahead first, heading into the wetlands. Argrave pulled his gloves a bit tighter and then walked forward just after him. Soon enough, the whole party disappeared into the cold morning mist, heading for the foul plague jester. As they pressed towards the first fortress, The unnaturalness of these wetlands was made readily apparent. Sylvik seemed to possess a boundary of protection she could extend. In Heroes of Berenda, it had been an annoyance. The player would follow by the side of this slow-moving character, staying within the safe zone as they moved to the first fortress. Now, things were different. Death was reality, and Argrave was tense. He and his companions stayed near Sylvik, the Wax Knights forming a loose circle around as Orion led them. The difference between that within Sylvik's protection and that without was visible and tangible. A cold mist surrounded them just outside a boundary as though they were trapped in a bubble. This mist writhed and twisted into shapes, faces, and let out muffled screams that were horrifyingly intense. Beyond that, the wetlands themselves twisted and writhed and bubbled, mud and water stretching and contorting like taffy made of rot. The first few hours, the howling fog shrouded them as though it were solid, and the light of the sun faded. The Wax Knights were forced to light the way with spell light. The waters rose, and before long, everyone waded through knee-high muck. Well, mostly everyone. Argrave was glad to be tall more than ever as the ice-cold waters stung at his shins. Experiencing this place firsthand made the Wax Knights take Sylvik's directions very seriously. Yet as the hours passed, the enemy started to come. The first to press through the boundary were the leopards. Their element of surprise was ruined by Sylvik's presence, who warned their party long before they came. Even still, their assault was a formidable thing. They came from the trees, jumping down from above, and simultaneously attacked from the ground. The Wax Knights on the perimeter intercepted them, but Orion dealt with the bulk. If anyone saw Orion fight, they would all probably think of the same thing: he can do whatever he wants. His talk of being blessed by 96 gods was no delusion. It was fact, and that was made wholly evident through the first fight alone. As the leopards stalked through the high waters to get at them, Orion raised his foot up and stamped the water. His foot did not sink back in the water. Instead, it met something solid, and he stood up out of the water. In not seconds, a wall of ice formed around their party, isolating the leopards that had jumped down at them from the trees. The Wax Knights treated this as the natural order of things, dispatching the large cats quickly with their enchanted blades. The wall of ice abated some of the assault, as all of the cats needed to climb over it to get at their party. Argrave attacked sparingly, making good use of his escort. He had instructed his party members to do much the same. After a time, the ground began to shake, and Sylvik said, "The rockhides come." "Hippos coming." Argrave relayed, but none treated this as seriously as they should have. Most didn't know what hippos were, probably. But the shaking grew in intensity, and the waters stirred. A great noise split the air, and Argrave was pelted by chunks of ice. A hippo broke through the barrier of ice Orion had established, bringing with it a tidal wave of water. Its skin was black, reminiscent of volcanic rock. It slammed into two Wax Knights in its charge, tossing them aside with ease. It must have been 10 tons of pure mass, towering above all. It pressed towards Sylvik, where Argrave and his party waited. "Annalise, Darren, let's." He started, stepping backwards and preparing spells. Orion stepped forth. He held one hand out and caught the top of the hippo's open mouth. His legs stayed firm, appearing indomitable. His elbow bent as it received and halted the hippo's charge, enchantments sparking as they protested the great force pressing against them. "And though the wicked may be strong," Orion said, a foul anger in his tone. The hippo loosed a deafening noise like a groan unique to its species, but the prince slammed its jaw shut with one hand, pushing it back in the same motion. His mace whistled through the air in an uppercut. It struck the hippo on the bottom of its jaw. It was powerful enough to send its titanic head into the air, and its front legs rose up out of the water. It collapsed back into the ice wall, its jaw out of its hinges. It was alive, but badly wounded from one strike. The righteous always win, Orion finished. He reached out his hand and finished the hippo, pressing through its eye to destroy the brain. Once he pulled his hand free, he looked beyond the breach in the ice wall, where two more of the gigantic creatures approached. Orion stepped atop the corpse of the rockhide he'd just ended, moving to meet both alone. Argrave looked away, content that Orion would be able to handle all comers from that side. He spotted something atop one of the ice walls, and his gaze locked onto it. A black gibbon as large as a man hung from one of the trees, one of its two long arms clinging to the branch. The other held a stake that hummed with liquid light. The gibbon had a pouch on its neck. It inflated with air, letting out a quaint sound as it turned pinker. After, it let out a staccato call, several high-pitched hoos that filled the air. Argrave tensed, and as the gibbon called, the apes descended on them en masse, swinging from the overhanging trees so adeptly it was impressive despite the danger. Recognizing the threat, Argrave used waning cycle blood moon. Immediately, a thread of his blood formed a circle before his hands as the Wax Knights confronted the apes, immediately proving his caution warranted. The apes swung their light-imbued sticks with intense ferocity. Their arms were 6 feet long and bursal. These humble sticks blessed by wetland spirits cut through enchanted armor easily. Yet the Wax Knights were not mere knights. Their waxbox-ridden skin was as hard as stone, and they felt no pain. What few blows they did not parry with their enchanted blades were returned twofold, and the gibbons fell one after the other. Though they stemmed the tide somewhat, it was not sufficient to stop all. Annalise conjured a B-rank ward, her own magic. This time, and not from the ring, to confront the tide of apes that hunted them. The sticks slammed against the golden ward as the apes cried out angrily, and after not a second, they broke past, screaming hoo hoo hoo. Argrave stepped ahead of his three companions and greeted the apes with blood magic, sending crescent blades of his dark blood towards each and all that pressed further. It was an overwhelming slaughter, and Argrave did not need to use even a quarter as many as he had against the sentinels in the mud-hallowed ground. A good thing, too, receiving a single blow from the gibbon's weapons could break bones easily. When the last gibbon fell, Argrave turned his head about, searching for more foes. Just then, a hippo barreled through the ice wall. Argrave prepared to fight, only to see the hippo scrambled away on its back, feet swinging through the air as it tried to turn and run. Orion stepped forward, planting his foot on its stomach. He pressed his foot down and bashed his mace against its head relentlessly, each blow causing the water to stir and yet more ice to break. When it finally stopped struggling, Orion stopped swinging. His breath was not labored at all, and he glanced around, giant black braid matted with blood. He looked at his mace, it had bent slightly, and he corrected it with one hand. The faithful cannot be stayed, Orion concluded. We eat, rest, and then press onwards. No more than 15 minutes. In their first battle, one of the wax knights very nearly died from that hippo's charge. His spine was broken, and he barely avoided drowning before being rescued. A broken spine was a damning thing on Earth, but magic proved its differences from modern medicine. The broken spine was healed by one of the wax knights. Orion spoke to Durin as he ate, telling him about the Vaska Pantheon. Even now, the prince did not forget his promise to give the tribal lessons on the Pantheon. Argrave listened to Annalise as she disclosed something, and then Argrave stepped away, coming to stand on a tree's root that was above the water. The fortress is an hour's walk away, Argrave called out, drawing all's attention. There'll be another fight waiting there. The corpse puppeteer, Wakwak. Argrave looked around, then pointed to Orion. Like the name suggests, this thing controls the corpses of those fallen. We'll be fighting against those that conquered these wetlands years ago, powerful warriors all, and with numbers no less than the army that took this land. Orion crossed his arms, listening intently. I'll need you to stem the tide, Orion, Argrave explained. You and your wax knights are the only thing capable of holding back that horde of the dead. What's more, you need to remember this, if your comrades should die, crush their skulls. Elsewise, they'll rise again, and fight you. Meanwhile, my companions and I will deal with Wakwak. Sylvic will help us make a path. Argrave placed his hand to his chest, the other waving to his allies. If you go, Orion, I'm sure the enemy will try and flee. Can't have that happen. Can you be trusted with this task? One wax knight argued. Of course they can, Orion said at once, slamming his giant hand against the knight's back. I trust my brother and his companions. Look how he bleeds for us. He uses his own blood to stay our enemies. Orion moved to the slain gibbons, where he'd used blood magic to fell his foes. They have faced fouler and come away fine. Would that you knew of their deeds. Argrave frowned, staring down at Orion. As much as he wished Durin had not disclosed everything, he could not blame him for doing so. I shall obey. Orion placed his hand to his heart. I look forward to seeing this Wakwak's head. It has no head. Argrave shook his head. But you'll get what you want, I suspect. Chapter 193, Puppet Show. Swamps were never intended to accommodate grand fortresses. That fact became apparent as they pressed onwards into the mire of misery. The screaming mists and twisting grounds stayed only by Sylvic's protection. The wading water lessened, and they planted their feet upon dry ground, or at least, as dry as mud could get. Once they saw stone bricks, the harrowing fog around them began to dissipate. That did not diminish the lightlessness, though, and when Argrave looked up, he spotted branches of a towering tree above. The tree dwarfed skyscrapers, even. It was a verdant thing with bright green leaves. The leaves had patterns on them that looked vaguely like faces. Closest to the tree's trunk, long and thick vines descended, bearing bright red fruits that looked full of juice. Though the crying fog had been a source of great discomfort, its sudden absence was just as unsettling. They passed by wreckages of stone. One tower sunk into the mud so completely only its top could be seen, and its baluster had been consumed by algae and other growth. Soon enough, the fortress itself came into view. Its walls sunk and rose in random places, some towering 30 feet while other portions were barely a step above where they stood. The gate to the fortress was crooked, and its iron portcullis looked to have been ripped apart by something. Argrave could barely see roots beyond the crooked gate. Orion, who had been leading, stopped, and Argrave caught up to him. I can feel it. The evil in the air. It's so thick I can smell it, Orion growled. Ideally, you'll be able to see it and kill it soon enough, Argrave consoled him. Orion looked back, and though the words had been a jest in part, they seemed to make Orion only more eager. Argrave took a deep breath and clenched his fists. He still felt a little anemic, both from the battle on the mud-hallowed grounds and the confrontation with the gibbons earlier. Nevertheless, there was no time for him to wallow. He was sure he'd be fine. Annalise, Guilliman, Durin. He looked back, but his question caught in his throat. They were ready, all of them, Durin with glaive in hand, Annalise with hair braided back for combat, Guilliman with his giant killers held tight in each hand. He could rely on them, but they had to rely on him, too, he knew. Never again, came that mantra once more, ringing in Argrave's head. Never again let your incapability endanger them. Let's go, Argrave said instead of his question. Sylvic, stay out of the fighting. I'll need all your help to get to Wakwak. We'll wait for Orion and his knights to thin the foes. And I'll look for an opportunity to rush in. Sylvic nodded. With that confirmation, Orion and Argrave passed beneath the crooked gate to the fortress, where the trunk of the tree towering above them waited. Their party deposited their packs on the dry land, preparing for combat. The entire interior of the fortress had been subsumed into this great tree, the keep, the detached houses, all of it. Roots small and large marred the central square. And as soon as Argrave's foot brushed against a root, the tree came alive. The round, red fruits up high exploded outwards in clouds of red mist. Bodies fell like corpses cut from nooses, tightly packed and uncountable. They landed on the ground, truly dead. But the roots across the central square writhed, piercing deep into the fallen bodies. Then, they rose, all of them. They were steel-armored knights, mages bearing robes with grey owls embedded on their shoulder, and elite archers, each and all undecayed as though they'd died yesterday and not years ago. One would not think them undead, for intelligence still gleamed in their eyes, and their movements were still natural. Orion stepped ahead of their group, holding his mace before his face. That our enemies denied them even peaceful death. The shaft of the mace grew red-hot, then the mace itself burst into flames. The fires of Gale's justice will burn you through, my brothers and sisters, and I will cast your ashes to the wind. When I am finished, all will be as it should be. Don't burn the tree down. I'll be in there, Argrave wished to say. The battle did not begin with the roar screeches that the animals had. Instead, the blood that had exploded out from the fruits preserving the dead began to rain upon them, and the battle began with nary a sound. The puppeteered mages threw fire, ice, and lightning upon Orion as he pressed forward. The archers, too, rained arrows upon him. The prince dodged the attacks with inhuman finesse. Even those spells he could not dodge, namely, the lightning magic, did not slow him in the slightest. The prince did not seem capable of pain, just as the knights who followed him. Orion danced past their onslaught, and the vanquished knights of an invasion past rushed forth to confront him. His aflame mace seemed to trivialize his foes. Their shields of steel would crumple like thin tin when struck, oftentimes tearing their arms free outright. Despite this, they only died when their heads were severed or crushed. The puppeteered knights swarmed over Orion, a tide of steel and sound that never once seemed able to overcome the terrifying prince blessed by the gods. They were too many to count. To say 1,000 would be to underestimate their numbers, and more joined every second, pouring out from the buildings of the keep or the roots of the trees. Yet the wax knights joined the fray. They were royal knights of House Vaska, chosen from the best knights of the kingdom and given equipment enchanted to the highest possible modern standards. They were more than that, too. The waxpox made their skin as hard as stone and numbed their pain utterly. More than that, they had been blessed by Orion. Like echoes of their master, they joined the battle. Argrave waited and watched, staying far from the conflict with his companions close at hand. The battle raged louder and louder as more joined. They quickly dealt with what few targeted them, looking for any opportunity to press past the tide of the dead. Then, Argrave spotted a thin in the constant trickle of dead pouring from the roots. After me, he shouted, stepping forth. Waste no time. Speed is our sole objective, he commanded as his walk transitioned to a sprint. The puppeteered dead were not simple undead, they had a sole strategist behind them, and as Argrave and his companions neared, that strategy changed accordingly. A wing of troops trying to engage Orion and his wax knights broke free, attempting to confront them. Yet Argrave and his party moved too quickly, and they surged past before they could be blocked. Mages assaulted them as they kept running. Argrave and Annalise dealt with the slower-moving spells, using their rings to conjure wards freely. As for lightning magic, Guilliman caught them all with his giant killers. Lightning magic was the perfect counter to other mages. Yeah, they had a lightning rod, and more than that, one that benefited from their attacks. His azure daggers glowed all the brighter as he caught attack after attack. Duran was hit by a stray arrow in his helmet's cheek, and he stumbled. Argrave slowed for his companion, but Guilliman grabbed him beneath his armpit and hefted him up, and the tribal laughed as he picked up the pace. Stings, he shouted. If not for those enchanted things you gave me at Just, might be I'd be bleeding. That brief moment of pause allowed the dead rising from the roots of the towering tree block them. Argrave looked to Annalise. She understood his meaning without words, and she prepared a devastating B-rank spell. Yet before Annalise could, roots dancing in tandem with liquid light writhed and twisted out of the ground in snake-like spirals, casting aside the crowd of dead with ease. Argrave looked back in time to see Sylvic pulling her arm free from the ground, roots retracting back within. He gave her a quick nod, then resumed his sprint. They made it to the plethora of tangled roots at the foot of the towering tree. Sylvic, now's your time, he called out. The wetland spirit stepped forth, placing her arm uncorrupted by the waxpox against the tree. The ground began to shake, and the tree itself cried out as though resisting whatever force was being exerted upon it. Then, the roots, the largest of which were twice as thick as Guilliman, started to coil. They whipped about, scattering dirt and stone everywhere, and bored through the earth towards the depths of the towering tree ahead. When Sylvic finally freed her hand, a great tunnel that looked like a path of woven wicker stretched on into darkness. Argrave conjured spell light, then said, "Move quickly. Once we're in, the dead will flood behind us." "They're already flooding," Durin shouted, the first to press into the tunnel. Argrave chuckled despite the situation and ducked low, following just behind him. Their party barreled through the tunnel recklessly, practically falling over each other in haste. Argrave slammed against walls and ceilings time and time again from the chaotic and uneven path. He could hear the clanging of steel behind him as the knights pursued them every bit as disorderly as they ran. Argrave and Durin both came to a steep point, and the two stumbled down the wicker tunnel, bouncing and bumbling their way down. They met air, and both collapsed into a mound of dirt and roots. Argrave's spell light illuminated the area, and at once, Argrave recognized this place. As he turned his head about, deadly saw from that fall. He saw Wokwak. Wokwak had once been human, one part of it, at least. Now, it could never be misconstrued as such. It was a mass of roots stemming from a heart with an eyeball on it. Each of the roots formed myriad hands which dug into the trunk of the great tree around them. The fingers moved, each and all commanding the soldiers which Ryan confronted outside. The eyeball focused on them, then widened and danced about its heart-like body in frenzy, growing bloodshot. Argrave rose to his feet and grabbed Durin, pulling the tribal back. Just as he did so, a great fruit lying above the heart exploded, and 7 bodies dropped down. At once, the corpse puppeteer took control of them, and they rose. A noble-looking man with black hair and grey eyes rose first, standing tall. He had Vaskar ancestry, evidently. 4 knights with the symbol of an eagle rose up, standing to guard him, while 2 mages stood just behind the lordly man. The lord of this fortress and his retinue, now, the honor guard of the corpse puppeteer, Argrave recognized. Glimmin and Annalise descended with considerably more grace than Argrave and Durin had, falling just behind them. Sylvic was last, and she was lowered down, carried by roots. "Wokwak. A human who consumed Prednas," Sylvic said in shock. "No time for talk. Seal the tunnel, Sylvic," he directed. The wetland spirit wasted no time in doing so, and roots sealed the tunnel woven of wood and dirt so that their pursuers would not so easily make it to them. "Excellent. Everything's going swimmingly," Argrave roared. "Pleased. As we discussed, killing minions is only a waste of our time." Chapter 194, Flawless Show. There was a simple principle in many RPGs, action or otherwise: don't kill what the summoner summons, just kill the summoner, and then all the problems will go away naturally. Their strategy hinged on that simple principle. There were obstacles, of course, there always were. The puppeteered lord and his 2 mages stayed near the vast heart that was Wokwak. At once, their party of 3 conjured wards each and all, B rank, judging from the golden color alone, and working in tandem to create multiple layers. It served as a great protection against ranged attacks. Yet Argrave and his companions did not blindly rush forth. The tunnel they had entered from had been sealed by Sylvic, and they had time. Instead, they stepped backwards, heading for the edge of the room. Glimmin discarded his wind-enchanted greatsword and pulled his bow from his back, knocking an arrow quickly. The 3 spellcasters of the party prepared spells, and attacked the lord's honor guard of 4 knights, unprotected by the wards. Though the elven vampire still had enchanted arrows made in just, he used mundane ones, deliberately so. Argrave, Annalise, and Durin all used spells of lesser ranks, some even E rank. It was a simple onslaught of attacks that could not be considered deadly but was nonetheless unignorable. And the knights did not ignore it. All 4 rushed towards Argrave and his companions in a side-by-side pursuit, as dogged as the dead could be. While they pursued, their party's attacks continued as ever, barely denting the well-made armor of their opponents. The gleaming enchanted blades of their opponents grew ever closer. "Now's a good time," Argrave called out levelly, an iron focus on the scene before them. Sylvic placed her uncorrupted arm to the ground, and the roots in the ground spurred to action. 2 hands of roots burst into the center of their small formation, then pushed them aside as though opening a curtain. The knights were thrown aside a great distance, entirely disrupted. A clear path led to Wokwak and its mage guard. No one needed a command to begin the charge forth. Glimmin discarded his bow, kneeling to the ground and dropping it as he rushed forth while pulling free his ebony axe from its loop on his belt. He trusted to Durin, who caught it while setting down his glaive in one smooth motion. With both hands freed, the elven vampire drew the giant killers once more, still slightly sparking with electricity from defending against earlier assaults. Annalise and Gilliman slowed. She charged the giant killers with potent lightning magic, firing again and again. Durin and Argrave moved forward. With one hand, Argrave conjured the D-rank, gore scalpel, and blood from his wrist formed a knife. With the other hand, conjured, electric heels, jumped to the sky. Durin slammed the ebony axe against the first B-rank ward. It cracked heavily, golden chips of light scattering, but did not shatter entirely. Argrave finished it with his black-blooded, gore scalpel, and then the tribal carried on to the next barrier, roaring mightily with each blow. Once the second broke, roots descended from the ceiling, wrapping around the heart-like body of Wokwak and lifting it up into protection ever so slowly. Once the third ward broke, The puppet-eared lord of this fortress drew a rapier at his side, lunging straight for Argrave. He could only fall on his back to dodge. The pair of mages chose to attack Duran. The tribal narrowly dodged a spear of ice, but a ball of fire struck his helmet, casting it off. His hair and much of his face caught aflame, and he fell to the ground screaming. Argrave willed all of the electric heels he'd conjured to attack Glimmen. The elven vampire received them with his giant killers and sprinted forth towards the retreating Wok-Wak. The puppet-eared lord moved to intercept him. The tip of the rapier attempted to impale him with his own charge, but Glimmen nimbly dodged and planted his foot on the lord's shoulder. He used the dead man as a springboard and launched up towards Wok-Wak. Both giant killers struck home. All of that potent electricity surged through the foul corpse puppeteer, creating a spark so blinding that Argrave felt he'd lost all sight. His ears hurt terribly, and he could hear nothing. Seconds passed, and only then did things begin to fade. His vision was stained white, yet slowly recovered. The heart-like body of Wok-Wak had been burnt so badly that charred flesh and roots alike collapsed down onto Glimmen, who clung to the giant killers while shielding his eyes. Argrave saw Duran still writhing in agony as the flames spread across his head. Though he could barely feel his limbs, he knew how to move them. He rushed to Duran, removing his duster and smothering the flames. Argrave looked around, still unable to hear. His vision stained white from the blinding light. The 7 puppets they'd been fighting had fallen to the ground, well and truly dead. His gaze jumped from companion to companion, ensuring all were at least alive. And so they were. Exhausted, Argrave settled his head against the ground. As adrenaline faded, pain set into his bones and his skin earnestly. But he was well used to persisting through pain. Argrave was the first to rise to his feet, still deaf as ever. He pulled his duster off Duran and set to work healing the burns. It seemed the first day was over. I'm the smallest one here, yet I get hit the most. Why is this? Duran questioned bitterly. The wounds on his face had healed, but much of his hair had been burnt away, leaving him with half a bald patch on his otherwise perfect set of locks. Maybe take comfort in the fact that you're alive, and the burns are healed. 2 died, Argrave reminded him. The 5 of them rested separately from the Wax Knights. An improvised funeral was being held. Orion held one of the fallen knights in his hands while the corpse was aflame, drifting away piece by piece as ashes lost to the wind. The other Wax Knights knelt before Orion, hands clasped together as they knelt in prayer. Their 2 golden sets of enchanted armor had been set aside in a safe place. Armor was always custom-made, and it could fit no one else that did not already have one. It was to be retrieved as they left. 3 died, Sylvic argued. My friend, Prednis. Consumed. I cannot make sense of it. Sylvic shook her head, voice with a rare display of emotion. All of the other wetland spirits are dead, Argrave told Sylvic. Each and all, consumed by the Plague Jester's loyal servants. Their power annihilated. Barring you, actually. Sylvic lowered her head, crown of stag-like roots moving with it. I don't understand his strength, Glimmen commented in frustration as he watched Orion join the club. Argrave returned, still cleaning dried blood out of his ears. His hearing had returned. Annalise had to heal his ruptured eardrums, though he is only human. I know this to be true. Glimmen crossed his arms, shaking his head. Argrave looked up at Glimmen, then sat against a tree root. He's blessed by gods. His strength isn't his own. My strength is not my own, yet I am still vastly weaker than him. Glimmen pointed to his chest, referring to both the enchanted crown embedded in his helmet and the vampiric beast in his blood. Argrave looked to the ground. That'll change, if things go my way. Glimmen looked to him. You have yet more items to give? Argrave rubbed his hands together. In time, the boundaries between this realm and other realms will weaken. Meaning? Glimmen pressed. The Erectic Kiat is judging gods, going by your culture's name for him. Argrave pointed to him. But the gods get their own defense, even if it isn't an active form. Once the boundaries weaken, Orion won't be the only one to be blessed by gods. Already, I have my thing. Orion has his blessings. Glimmen stepped over to stand above Argrave. You mean to say? Yeah, that's the plan for you and Duran. When the time comes. Got plans for me and Annalise, too. Glimmen stepped away, lost in thought, then turned back. I will champion none besides Vade, he declared. I know, Argrave nodded. I'm not as picky, Duran contributed. As long as nothing is expected of me, of course. Don't fancy playing toady to some tyrannical god just so I can toss aside large rocks with ease. Argrave stretched his legs. Put it out of your mind. This is all far away. It's why I never brought it up. Annalise said nothing as she stared at Orion's improvised funeral. He had already told her of this long ago. We did well today. Argrave rose to his feet. Things went near as well as they could have. Nevertheless, considering Magnus' death, and the near-active sabotage going on around us, it'd be good to stay alert. Sylvic, everyone, when the time comes for sleep, let's stick closely together, and with our company in sight, he concluded, gaze turning to Orion. Everyone tiredly agreed. Only 1 day had passed, yet already these wetlands wore away their spirit. The day had not yet concluded. Argrave sat a fair distance from Sylvic, leaning against Annalise as he gazed upon the Matrix 4, blood-furred bow, Even still, Gleeman tended to his armor, which sorely needed maintenance after their trek through the wetlands. Sylvik's displays of power today were not without cost. The waxpox had spread across more of her body, consuming parts of her wooden neck and nearing her face. It had begun to encroach upon the uncorrupted side, too. He sat near Sylvik mostly to ward away Orion. Yet as he read, he heard footsteps. Durin and Orion walked through the square of the castle, Orion fervently explaining something to the tribal, who seemed miserable beyond compare, an effect that was only increased by the sad-looking bald patch from his recent burns. I will repeat the names back to you tomorrow, and I expect you to respond in kind, Orion said. This is but the foundations. How will you memorize scriptures if you cannot remember the names of the gods? Okay, agreed Durin, hollow and dead. Argrave made a mental note to do something nice for the tribal very soon. Orion patted Durin's back, sending him towards Argrave like a child sent off to school. Argrave watched the towering prince warily as he walked towards them. Brother, Orion began, tone cold. I had questions. Argrave closed the book and gestured for Orion to ask without words. His grey eyes jumped to Sylvik for half a second. Then, he asked, a coarse puppeteer, a plague jester, no mere coincidence, is it? Argrave furrowed his brows. It isn't, but I didn't think you'd care. You know the truth of things, then? I would hear it, Orion insisted, coming to sit cross-legged before Argrave. Argrave adjusted his legs, and then set the book for, blood-fud bow, aside. All right. Well, sure. Let me think for a moment. Argrave tapped his chin as he thought of how to frame the story. The conquest of the wetlands didn't end once these fortresses were made, Argrave began, gesturing to the walls around them. The swamp folk refused to be subjects, refused to abandon their customs and faiths, and refused to integrate into Vasco society. And so, the newly anointed lords of this area undertook a second conquest, a conquest of spirit. Argrave rubbed his hands together, thinking more. The lords butchered the swamp folk by the hundreds, making violent examples of all troublemakers. Community leaders received a different fate. Shamans to the wetland spirits were mostly killed. Some, though, they were taken in as amusements to the Archduke of this land. Wakwak, for instance, was forced to play out puppet shows of the conquest of the wetlands, reliving things time and time again. Argrave looked to the tree that still stood tall, where the corpse puppeteer had once lived. There were plenty of others, Argrave continued, looking back to Orion. A jongle, a bard, a mummer, a troubadour. We won't fight them all, of course. Just enough to get to the ringleader, the jester. Orion nodded, then locked his gaze upon Argrave. Is there no room for other options? Argrave raised a brow. For ordinary people, that might mean diplomacy. For Orion, it surely meant getting them to convert. When Orion nodded, he continued, that option, it was lost long ago. Violence begets violence. The moment you veer from persuasion and debate to open attack, neither side will return until the other is defeated. Argrave pursed his lips in hesitation, then said, there's a lesson in that, Orion. Orion stared at the ground, grey eyes distant. Then, he looked to Argrave, saying simply, rest well, brother. Lady Annalise. Durin. Gleeman. His gaze fell to Sylvik. And you, Sylvik, he said, though the word sounded forced. Argrave watched Orion leave, perplexed. Chapter 195, Grappling the Powerful. At this point, the main challenge is confining the infected to the camps, Mina spoke to Indune, staring out over the city of Veden from the castle. People that catch the disease spread it indefinitely. Some people, when it stops spreading, resume mingling into society. Like this, the outbreaks never really stop. Just use force. Indune shook his head disapprovingly. It isn't so difficult. Mina looked to him. Do you think this tiny county has the manpower to force more than half of its residents into refugee camps or within their own homes? And even then, the last thing we wish is for our military to be infected with this disease. That would only exacerbate the disaster. Who said anything about confining them? Indune's blue eyes locked with Mina's, veritably shining. Yes, we can kill anyone that disagrees with us, become the rulers of corpses. It'll be harder to get them to tend the fields that way, I'm sure. But at least we'll have gotten what we wanted, Mina challenged him. Indune's jaw clenched as he stared at Mina, eyes narrowing with anger. Then, one corner of his mouth split open, and he started laughing dryly. You've a lot of bravery for one so small, he noted as his laughter trailed off. I've killed for less. Mina stared back at him, not flinching at all. Then, she nodded. We established this already. You want to kill people for getting sick. Even Indune was flabbergasted by her boldness. He only laughed once more, then turned back to the city, watching out. He could not be both amused and angry, and he was more amused than anything. Fine. He conceded, crossing his arms and leaning against one of the keep's pillars. People that resume their tasks despite their sickness, it's a selfish act, so they're selfish people. Give them incentive to stay inside, they'll fall in line. Greed is an easy, base emotion to satisfy. You mean pay them? Veden is not. Exactly. Indune considered for half a second, then said, promise exemptions from taxes. It's not an immediate boon, but the promise alone will convince many to obey. You don't even need to uphold the promise." He looked to her. Mina nodded, eyes distant as she considered his idea. No, it's a good idea. Exemptions will be sorely needed after the devastation from the plague. Anyway, it's the promise that matters. Promises enough to get them to do what you want." Mina walked over to her desk, then retrieved quill and paper. "Nicoletta told me something once. Even if you view people as tools, well-maintained tools perform a task all the better." And Dune bit his lip, a bit displeased at the mention of Nicoletta. He stepped towards Mina, arguing, "If people know there are consequences, they'll work hard. They'll only work as hard as they need to avoid consequences." Mina quickly rebutted, "If people love their ruler, they'll do what they need to and more. People crave to rise, and as they do so, they'll bring you up with them. All they need is opportunity and reward." And Dune stared down at her, but she turned to the document in front of her and began writing in it diligently. The prince opened his mouth once more, but someone entered the door. And Dune turned his head back, spotting one of his knights. He strode forward and pushed the man on his chest. "You don't knock," he said coldly. "An urgent matter, Prince." The knight knelt. "Forgive me." And Dune stared down at the kneeling knight, then cast a glance back to Mina. Almost bitterly, he said, "Speak, then." "Stop wasting time." "Prince Magnus is dead, my prince," the knight relayed, bowing all the lower. "Forgive me." And Dune took a deep breath of surprise. "What? That wandering fool?" "He was murdered, my prince, in the wetlands to the northwest." And Dune frowned. "Where Orion is?" He heard Mina set her quill down behind him, paying closer attention. "Yes, my prince," the knight confirmed. "Any more details?" And Dune inquired, the only genuine emotion on his tone that of perplexment. "The news is only just now being spread, my prince, forgive me." And Dune scratched the bottom of his clean-shaven chin, turning away and walking about in thought. "Mina, do you think you can handle things?" "I should probably return to Dirika." Mina blinked quickly, then looked to the papers before her. "It is. I mean, I see no reason why." "Then I'll go," and Dune interrupted in her, his interest lost once he heard her bumbling. He stepped away, heading for the door. "You'll leave as soon as things get challenging?" she called out, almost urgently. And Dune paused at the door, then turned round. His eyes were frowning, but his mouth was widened in a grin. "What did you say?" She blinked quickly, obviously flustered, but she kept her yellow eyes fixed firmly on the prince nonetheless. "I think you heard me," she said. "You think this is challenging?" he questioned coldly. "One of the options you always use is off the table," Mina said, her voice steady. "If that isn't a challenge, what is?" And Dune started laughing once more, placing one gauntleted hand to hide his mouth. "You seem determined to face repercussions of some sort. I wonder why that might be?" He stepped right up to his desk, and the two of them endured a long, tacit staring contest. The prince turned back to the knight. "Send word to Dirika I'll be preoccupied with something for a time." "Why have you been working so frenziedly lately?" Annalise questioned as they sat together in the darkness of night. It felt like they were alone, but in truth, Guilliman and Sylvik both were close enough to hear. Duran was the only amongst them sleeping, a well-deserved rest, by Argrave's estimation. Argrave gazed at the Matrix 4, blood-furred bow, with his golden eyes distant, as though hesitating. "Then," he said, "Duran being taken away for interrogation put things into perspective." Annalise sighed. "I knew it was that. Yet even still, if you overstrain yourself, you will suffer more in the long run." Hearing that, Argrave bit his lip in contemplation, yet he did not shut the book. "I've got a different sort of bad dream, now, Annalise. Not about my death. Not the low way, not in Dune. But," he sighed, "the thing I fear most, now, is watching the sun set alone." Annalise grew silent, before noting, "Sometimes, I question if you are simply too sweet, or if you merely know precisely what to say to stop me from dissuading you." They both laughed quietly. After, Argrave looked to her and questioned, "Do you think you can help me out? Mentor me, maybe?" She paused, glancing at the book. "Blood magic," Annalise noted, trailing off. "It's just the one I've been studying most," he assured her. Annalise pushed away and moved to sit across from him as quietly as she could. Sitting cross-legged, she gestured towards him. "Try and cast it," she directed. Taking a deep breath, Argrave gave one last look at the whirling matrix conjured from the book and then closed it. He set it aside, then held out his hand. He had seen the matrix enough that it conjured as quickly as any spell might have. It hovered in the air, inanimate and ineffectual. He tried to set it into motion in the same moment he willed magic into it, making it whole. It shattered after not half a second. Argrave sighed and lowered his hand, while Annalise's amber eyes stayed locked on where his hand had just been. Her face was as steady as stone for a time, and she said nothing. Eventually, her eyes met with his and she commanded. Again. Argrave did so. Once again, it shattered nearly identically. Annalise leaned back, supporting herself with her arms. She spaced out, lost in thought and contemplation. Argrave waited patiently, hands on his knees. "You are not moving it from every direction you can," she finally said. "It resembles. It is like if you had a tower, And you tried to move only the first floor. You neglect pushing the tower above. It all needs to move at once, lest it fold and collapse. Argrave frowned. That was the last thing he thought she'd say. But what angle am I missing? I feel like I'm applying the force evenly. She scratched her forehead. I cannot say. The force applied is invisible. I can only comprehend it when I am the one using it. Would it help if I did it again? Argrave pressed eagerly. It would help if you rested. Finally, she concluded, moving back. I will. I hope you do the same. Argrave watched her leave, heading to where they slept. Argrave bit his lip, considering joining her. Never again, came that voice, fighting against the promise of comfort and fulfillment he knew he'd feel if he joined her. With a sigh, Argrave opened the spellbook, eyes bloodshot but still burning with a steady flame of ambition. After a long time with no results, the night passed and morning dawned. Argrave had not slept at all, and he was the only besides Gilliman and Sylvik awake this early. He stared up at the branches of the tree that Wakwak had resided in dully. Despite persisting for so long, his black blood enabled him to function on a relatively normal level. The reasons why he obtained it, least of all his near-exponential magic growth, counted up day by day. He ruminated on what Annalise had advised him time and time again. The book long ago discarded. The matrix was not his problem, his method was the problem, plainly enough. He held his hands out and tried to emulate how to move the entire matrix in bizarre motions, then clenched his hands together in embarrassment. But then, after a time, Argrave grew still. His brows slowly lowered, his vision narrowing, as he pondered dimensionality and exponentiality. To have something in one dimension could be represented by one number. To have something in two dimensions could be represented in 2 times 2, for instance. For 3, this trend continued, 2 by 2 by 2. He rose to his feet, Annalise's analogy of his attempts to move the first floor of a tower finally ringing in his head. He strode away from his party, ignoring his own advice for them all to stick together, and moved to an isolated place in the fortress courtyard. Gilliman watched him go, perplexed. Argrave had always viewed himself as something existing only in 3 dimensions. Maybe it was fact, he wasn't so sure, anymore. But the fact remained that the tool that he used was beyond that, and the force that he had to exert upon the matrix had to be beyond that, as well. With this new perspective, Argrave held his hand out and conjured the matrix once more. He tried to set it into motion, yet also acted upon that imperceptible, imperceivable 4th dimension to things. It set into motion, and then shattered. Argrave stood there hollowly for a moment, then looked at his hands in disappointment. His bitterness slowly morphed into a stubborn anger, though, and he held his hand out once more, confidence in his idea renewed. The matrix formed, and then whirled. Argrave started to breath faster as it persisted for more than half a second, yet then it shattered once more. He looked at his hand once more, yet not with disappointment. Instead, his eyes were eager and hungry. Have to memorize the path, now. Argrave muttered as he ran off, retrieving the book for Bloodfud Bow. Once again, he studied not only the matrix, but the way it moved, and the path it took. With it, he closed the book, and held his hand out once again. The matrix formed. It began to swirl, persisting. Argrave willed his magic forth, and instead of meeting a wall as it always had, the matrix accepted it. Then, as though it never was, it dissipated. Argrave was panicked for but half a second before pain seized his arm. Twin spirals of blood pulled free of his arm, moving into position. The twin spirals formed a recurve bow in his left hand. He felt power brewing in his other hand, his blood bubbling just beneath the skin. He raised the hand up, and a string descended. An arrow formed, perfectly knocked but small, pumping blood ever so quickly. Argrave quickly wrenched his hand away and dispelled the magic, clutching his head as his vision grew white and his world spun with dizziness. The bow fell to the earth, nothing more than mere blood. Now, he took a few moments to collect himself, and the dizziness and lightheadedness slowly faded as he breathed quickly. Argrave stood straight once again, then looked around. He turned his head every which way, looking for anyone that had seen that. Finally, his gaze fell back to his hands, and he collapsed to his knees. He held his hand to his mouth to muffle his laughter for a time, then wiped away flowing tears once the laughter had faded. Once that was done, he took a few moments to collect himself, steadying his breathing and clearing his face. He cursed again and again in a low whisper, triumph and heartache both making his voice shake. Only once he had calmed down entirely did Argrave gather himself, returning back to where his companions were with only a slight grin on his face. Chapter 196, Stoked by Righteous Winds. Argrave disliked looking at a bronze hand mirror with something, or someone, rather, to find solace in. He didn't need to use it for motivation much at all anymore. Now, though, the day had passed, and he stared down at its surface in the early morning light. Traits: tall, black-blooded, intelligent, magic of inity, high, insomniac, blessing of supersession, max. Skills: elemental magic, C, blood magic, B, healing magic, C, illusion magic, C, warding magic, C, druidic magic, C, inscription, E, imbuing, E. Seeing that B just beside blood magic made him feel quite satisfied. Unfortunately, Argrave had underestimated himself. and brought no B-rank spellbooks with him besides that for Bloodfud Bow. He felt like he was wasting precious time that could be spent learning more and more B-rank spells, yet even still, his rate of advancement was quite exceptional. Between his high magic affinity, his black blood, that intelligent trait, and his own diligence in studying, maybe it was to be expected. He felt some fulfillment. His rate of advancement was not unprecedented, lore-wise, but it was quite fast. Orion's presence culled what might have been a seed of arrogance, though. With Bloodfud Bow, a single projectile attack with the potential for power far outmatching near all spells, Argrave could seriously injure Orion now. That was assuming the ridiculous possibility the man would stand still and let him charge it for minutes. Naturally, the Holy Fool could still crush him and all his companions without much issue. Fighting him personally was a long way off. Yet with B-rank magic at his hands, he could start planning for the future in earnest. His advancement to A rank would be as significant as his visit to the alchemist. He knew A rank was when a mage more closely integrated with magic, rather than merely using it, they would assimilate into it. It was a vague description, yet the innumerable processes to become A rank were so varied that only a vagary sufficed for describing it. Argrave stowed away the bronze hand mirror and rose, doing brief stretches before he emerged from the tent. Annalise sat on a large root not too far away, cleaning and braiding her long white hair back in preparation for travel. Annalise turned her head towards him yet remained focused on her task. "Good morning." "Is it?" "I'm not so sure," Argrave questioned, blinking his eyes as he raised his hands to his face. "You are pale," Annalise noted as Argrave wiped away his tired eyes. He'd gotten a few hours of sleep, but his current state of fatigue made him question if he'd have been better off staying awake the whole night. "I always have been," he answered quickly. "No. You had a healthy pallor not weeks ago, yet you keep." She trailed off. "Why are you so pleased with yourself?" Argrave's subtle grin broadened into a smile. "You're a good teacher. Anyone never tell you that?" Annalise's amber eyes grew wide as she placed things. "I see now. You broke into B rank with that blood magic spell. That's why you look so terrible, so tired." "Well, that's the demerit." Argrave brushed off the remark quickly. She stood and moved forth, running her fingers through her half-braided white hair in frustration. "You complain when you are miserable, and yet you never." "Why in the world do you never?" She sighed. "You will not use blood magic for the rest of this journey," she commanded, planting a finger to his chest. "I won't?" He raised a brow. "This is a concession you must make for me." "I will not bend on this matter," she stated plainly, amber eyes fierce as he'd ever seen them. "You insisted that I remain inside just for my safety." "I insist on this, for your safety." Argrave kept the stare going for a little bit. Then, he raised his hand and fixed her messy hair. "As long as it's not life or death." Annalise pouted, a rare expression on her, and one Argrave found quite adorable. "If it is truly life or death, use your blessing of—" Argrave placed one finger to her lips, shushing her. "We talked about this." "Stay quiet about that while we're here," he whispered, looking around. Thankfully, neither him nor his wax knights were nearby. She lowered her head with a nod of apology. "All right." "But to that point?" "Last night's venture delayed things," Argrave said in vague terms as he waved his hand dismissively. "Bloodfud Bow is blood magic, but B-rank magic is still B-rank magic, and therefore costly. I suspect night will fall before I can fully repay things, provided I don't expend much magic today." Fortunately, the battle for the second fortress won't involve much magic at all. She sighed, then looked up at Argrave once again. "B-rank." "I am happy for you," she finally congratulated him. "Perhaps now, you will rest easier and cease working so hard." Argrave only smiled in response, giving no verbal commitments. But in his head, those words still rang, "Never again, never again." Argrave went to inform the prince that they were ready to travel but found Orion standing off to the side, one hand held to his forehead. He was just out of sight of the wax knights, who assembled around a campfire as they ate their rations. Argrave could not recall seeing the prince in distress, so he walked up to him cautiously. At his footsteps, the prince raised his head. Argrave tilted his head questioningly, and Orion confided immediately, "Another of my knights vanished." "Vanished?" Argrave repeated. "Gone, disappeared during his watch," Orion explained. Argrave looked at the wax knights. They ate their rations and wrapped their wax-pox-rife flesh in clean bandages. Indeed, upon count, only 7 of the initial 10 they'd journeyed with were present. "Deserted, or?" Argrave mused. Orion grabbed his collar, and Argrave's heart fell into his stomach. "Deserted? Why would you say such a thing?" the prince questioned in a loud, angry whisper. Argrave calmly stated, "Look at them. It's but the first day, yet things are this challenging. I don't doubt their ability or their faithfulness, but men are men." Orion's grip loosened on Argrave's collar slowly, and the prince straightened. "Their flames must be stoked by righteous winds. Boosting their morale is important." "Yes," Argrave agreed, feeling a strange discomfort he could so quickly interpret Orion's words. Without another word, Orion stepped to where they gathered. Their prince's steady, determined approach towards them caused them all to rise to attention. "Faithful knights," Orion began. "3 of our number have left us. They swore an oath to the royal family, and to the gods, to live and die for the sake of the royal family. And now they have. More of you may, Orion, Argrave called out, stepping up just beside him. I have some things to say, he said quietly, recognizing well that a disaster might occur if this man spoke his earnest thoughts. Please speak, dear brother, Orion gestured. Argrave looked out to the Wax Knights. If ever before there'd been an intimidating crowd for public speaking, this was it. But public speaking was one of the few things Argrave was talented at, he believed. As Orion said, we stand here today with 3 fewer than we departed with yesterday. These men, these brave men, they marched forth with strength, with ideal, and they confronted the monstrous forces of the corpse puppeteer and the plague jester. And knowing that they are gone, what will you do for their memory? Argrave stepped around, eyes jumping around the small crowd of knights before him. You must never forget why they are gone, Argrave proclaimed. Forget not the sea of corpses you fought against yesterday. Forget not the foul beasts that hunted us through the wetlands. These are our foes. You must never forget that. And when we have won, and when we return, all of us, even the fallen, will return as heroes. Each and every face you see, they will owe you their lives. Each and every face you remember, every face that you long to see again, they will owe you their lives. If there is good, and if there is evil, then we are good, and we fight evil. Without giving so much as a single cheer, the Wax Knights kept staring on at him. He had confidence enough in his words, though, that he was sure he'd had a positive effect. I shall prepare Sylvic and my companions for travel. Sylvic must scout, per usual. Argrave turned to Orion. We'll travel less distance, and the battle to take the fortress will not be half as hard, but it's a better point to begin with the 3rd day. Wonderful, said Orion with vigor, beaming down at Argrave. Give my regards to Lady Annalise, and ensure Dran is prepared to recite the gods and their domains, he requested. Argrave nodded, making another mental note to do something really nice for Dran once all of this was behind them. Annalise proved herself an able scout once more, picking out a path with her star sparrow. Were it not for that tiny and resilient bird they'd claimed, this journey would have been 3 times as hard. Though she could not constantly watch for enemies, picking a path that did not have them endure wading through chest-high waters was a blessing enough to be considered miraculous. If the journey of the first day had 2 climaxes, one for the assault on the road, and the other the taking of the first fortress, the second day was not comparable in the slightest. Instead, it was a steady trickle of enemies, like a constant pressure upon their party. They had to keep watch at every moment for gibbons, like assassins paid by the wetlands, or endure a siege of leopards whilst Orion dealt with encroaching rock-hide hippos. With the constant pressure came tension. All of them were drawn so thin they were all ready to snap at a moment's notice, save the indomitable people of the party, namely Orion and Gilliman. With morale faltering, Argrave once again assumed the role he'd taken in the fortress. Some might call it a commander, but Argrave just felt like a motivational speaker. Soon enough, the Wax Knights looked to Argrave for direction as much as they did Orion. Someone more paranoid might think Argrave was trying to subvert them, but Orion seemed pleased that Argrave was taking extra efforts. Argrave struggled tremendously, though the extra role he so readily took had nothing to do with it. He was beset by constant headaches, and exertions that caused him no trouble yesterday made him quite exhausted today. It was a familiar feeling, and he was more than able to push past it. Even still, Annalise provided constant and unconditional support, and ensured that he ate properly during the whole journey. Between his anemia and the constant assault from enemies, he might have snapped without her. Yet she and all of Argrave's companions proved more than mere support, especially so on this day. Gilliman was ready for battle at every second, and when it came, fought like a man possessed. Annalise told Argrave in secret that the elven vampire felt as though he had something to prove when confronted with the unimaginable strength of Orion. Though Argrave was worried this might lead somewhere poor, he was grateful for his steadfast to lie all the same. Meanwhile, Duran slowly integrated into the party all the better. He worked well with Annalise, and he and Gilliman developed a rapport. There was some solace knowing rest would soon come as they grew ever nearer to the second fortress. Simultaneously, there was dread. The solace Argrave felt was like a gleaming fruit with unblemished skin that, once bitten, revealed blackened and rotted innards. Argrave's role was not so pivotal as it had been at the first fortress. The goal was simply to get by while the big fish battled it out. Even still, there was danger. There always was, it seemed, and doubly so when they stepped willingly onto a trap. Chapter 197, Endless Isles. Any further steps, and we will be within their grasp, Sylvic cautioned their party as they idled. Orion nodded. This was made clear to me earlier. Being within their grasp is unimportant. A weak grip is easily broken. His ever-zealous words did not abate Argrave's fear at all. Sylvic continued, cautioning, this will not be as other ambushes. We enter the distortion, the realm, of a being similar to myself. We will be in the heart of things, ostensibly surrounded by foes. It further suggests that the wetland spirit holding this fortress yet lives. If that is true, you will face more than a tide of corpses. Duran ran his finger against his bald patch caused by yesterday's burns. He had taken the hardest knocks during this journey, yet he did not falter. That steeled Argrave somewhat. Annalise stayed calm, likely dually from her own tranquil nature and the enchanted items he'd given to her at Jast. I will fight this intrepid troubadour. Argrave claims to be beyond this distortion. The remainder of you are more than capable, Orion assured. All save you, perhaps, will be unable to leave until the master of this distortion is dead and gone, or until you are allowed to leave, Sylvic once again warned. None intend to leave until the enemy is conquered, Orion rebutted at once. Without so much as a breath to gather his courage, Orion gestured for them to follow and stepped forth. In but a second, he seemed a chameleon that blended into the environment before he vanished altogether. Sylvic was the second to move, and just after the Wax Knights. Only once the first Wax Knight had entered did Argrave follow, his companions trailing just after him. Just the same as it had been when they traveled through the mud-hallowed grounds to find Sylvic and bring her before Orion, the scene distorted before Argrave, and he stepped into what might as well be another world. Endless aisles of green dotted the land before him, thick and tall plants like cattails and reeds growing up out of rich brown soil. These aisles were large, covered completely by greenery, like a vast archipelago of verdant growth. They were divided by fast-running rivers that were entirely clear yet seemed to stretch downwards forever as an ocean of water. The sky above was so blue and beautiful it was worthy of admiration. On one of the overgrown green aisles before them, a four-legged creature armored in shining, strong steel stood. It had a thick, round body easily identifiable as that of a horse's. Its legs were thick and strong. Where its neck might have held an equine head, a man's torso stood. A centaur, Argrave knew, and equipped in full steel plate that gleamed with enchantments. It dwarfed even the titanic rock-hide hippopotamuses they'd grappled with during their journey, and held an unstrung bow taller than Argrave in hand. Sitting on the centaur's back was a humanoid figure made of wood and teeming with liquid light within. It was quite similar in appearance to Sylvic, though without the waxpox corrupting most of its body. While Sylvic was decidedly made in imitation of a female, this rider was male. He bore a crown of roots atop his head, though they twisted and entwined together to resemble two horns. He had a beautifully ornate stringed instrument in his hand most resembling a guitar, though different enough it could not be called so. "We seek to kill the plague jester," Orion called out, stepping forth to the edge of the aisle all of them stood upon. "Will you stand down?" "We stood down once, after you had slain thousands," the troubadour back the armored centaur called out. "You made fools and singers of us, weaving tales and jests that mocked our own people." The centaur strung the bow and held his hand up, where part of the troubadour's wooden body morphed and broke off into a wooden arrow teeming with liquid light. The arrow was knocked and fired at Orion. Argrave flinched involuntarily at the quickly approaching projectile, yet Orion batted it aside with his mace, demonstrating inhuman speed. "Now, you will need to kill us all," the troubadour concluded. "Even then, we will not have stood down." Deflecting the arrow left the mace badly bent, and Orion corrected it with one hand. "Let it not be said I did not try to sway you," he said coldly as he stepped forth onto the river. His heavy plate boots sunk not an inch before ice formed. He stepped across the thick river to the island where the centaur and the troubadour waited, and every time his feet lifted up, the ice melted behind him. "That is a new spirit," Sylvic noted. "Like me, but young." It was a vaguely familiar line to what it had been in Heroes of Berenda. Argrave did not have time to marvel, though, and he looked about in paranoia for the first signs of their foes. And he saw it at once. The tall reeds of the islands brushed aside to make way for a new arrival, crawling free from the bottomless rivers dividing the islands. At first, it was one location. Then, all the cattails and reeds on the edge of the island they stood atop shifted aside, making way for fellow rivals. The Wax Knights bunched together, uncomfortable by the fact that they could not see what was approaching. Slowly, their opponents rose above the tall reeds. The sentinels of this wetland spirit were amphibious creatures, thick and long bodies closest in appearance to a crocodile. Their scales did not cover all their flesh, as though they were immature. Instead, one could see through their pink, translucent skin to spot organs that danced with liquid light, marking them as blessed by a wetland spirit. "We hole up, endure all that's thrown at us," Argrave shouted out, attempting to rally everyone as was planned. The Wax Knights answered him with a grunted ho of assent. Argrave gestured towards Sylvic and urged, "See what you can do to block off any of the banks with roots or reeds, eliminate some avenues of approach." At once, Sylvic hastened, sinking her root-like hand uncorrupted by waxpox into the reeds. The sentinels of this young troubadour pressed in on them with swaying, almost staggering steps. The closest opened their mouth and spewed poison gas, but their party was well prepared in advance for such assaults. Per Argrave's cautions, with each of the Wax Knights being spellcasters, wind magic quickly swept away the dangerous poison, scattering it and rendering it impotent. The reeds of this strange place slowly twisted and writhed, spurred by Sylvic to raise walls at the banks of the verdant isle. Their party did nothing more than hold back the sentinels, killing those who got too close. Though powerful and poisonous, they were slow creatures. The greatest concern was the others on this plane. Dragonflies as big as a grown man's torso came to assault them. Their movements were erratic, unpredictable. In one moment they would be one place, in the next they'd dart in a straight line towards one of them, before zigzagging and attacking from the back. Their fangs were like knives, and Argrave, with only the hood of his duster for protection, collected cuts to the face one after the other. Even with magic, they were difficult to defeat. Glimmer was the only who could consistently deal with them, but even then, they did not always fall. Elsewise, Argrave's Bromersoners used their conjured warriors well. The battle between the intrepid troubadour and Prince Orion raged in the background, the furthest thing from slow. Orion charged the duo of the centaur and troubadour with all the rage and persistence of a bull seeing red, and, fittingly, the intrepid troubadour dodged with as much grace as a matador. Arrow after arrow soared through the air at Orion, the armored centaur receiving more ammunition from the troubadour sitting on his back. All the while, it nimbly maneuvered around the aisles, jumping from aisle to aisle as the arrows sought their target, leaving trails of green light floating just behind. When the arrows struck the earth or the water, explosions of plant life rose up and targeted Orion, groans and creaks echoing like the sound of timber falling. Yet the prince weaved through the summoned plants and the near bullets beat arrows with far too much grace, doggedly seeking the troubadour as though he had a death grudge to settle. None of his blows managed to hit home, but they left devastation in their wake, and had the power of the elements behind them. Blow after blow ruined great swathes of this land, this eternal land of green isles. Orion's fists left poison writhing on the edges of reeds, slowly eating them from within. His kicks summoned winds, sparks, flames. Sometimes, he seemed to run on the air itself. And as ever, his strength and endurance went far beyond the realm of what was normal. His armor could barely keep up with his prowess. And as the fight proceeded, it became clear the troubadour could not keep up, either. When the centaur took to air, jumping to another island to flee Orion's pursuit, the prince took his mace in hand and threw it. It spun through the air wildly, yet it was moving so quickly and towards such a large target it did not need to be particularly precise. It hit the front leg of the beast man, and it crashed to the earth, throwing its rider down. Reeds and roots rose to conceal and protect the troubadour, but Orion was faster. He grabbed the wetland spirit by the neck and wrenched it free, tearing free copious amounts of writhing greenery with him. Argrave barely noticed this in the distance and felt some relief as he knew things would soon end. Yet Orion held the troubadour in the air, the stringed instrument dangling from his hands. Argrave waited for the end to come, and yet it did not. The centaur struggled to rise, incapable of doing so. The troubadour struggled desperately, yet it lacked the strength to free itself. All the while, "Is he talking?" Argrave questioned. Just then, he saw the reeds rise and twist around the injured leg of the centaur, replacing the lost flesh with wood and root. The troubadour kicked Orion with a sharp, light-imbued spike on the edge of its foot, and the prince staggered back. He slammed the troubadour to the earth at once, and, feeling as though his ears had popped, the scenery jarringly shifted around them. They were surrounded by stark, moss-covered old stone walls, with little else in sight. Orion stood there, pummeling the still corpse of the troubadour. The sentinels had been brought with them but began to scramble. The centaur, though, rose up to its feet. Orion turned his head, prepared to chase, yet already the beast man, much larger in close proximity, bounded over the stone walls and fled. Its steps shook the earth. "Orion!" Argrave shouted, running over. "I am fine," he assured, one hand held over the spot that he'd been kicked. A sharp fragment imbued with the liquid light of the wetland spirit persisted in the wound, though the lingering light faded quickly as the thing died. Argrave spared a glance at the fallen troubadour, which had become naught but a husk of wood leaking liquid light like oil. "What was that?" "You stood there like a..." Argrave began, trailing off. Orion pulled free the wood fragment, then crushed it. "I tried to accept his surrender." Argrave took a deep, incredulous breath. "He's changing," he knew. "And quickly. He doesn't have normal sensibilities. That centaur escaped because of those changes. Who knows what variables that will cause." "We should talk," Argrave said seriously. This might be the first time he'd said something like that to Orion. Hopefully, it would be the last. Chapter 198, Bizarre Adoption. Though Argrave knew that something needed to be said to Orion, those words did not come to his head immediately as the two of them walked away from the rest of the party. They entered into the keep of the fortress that had manifested after the battle had concluded. Argrave glanced around at decrepit wooden furniture covered in equal parts by wood rot and growths from the wetlands. Argrave came to stand over a table. Orion stood opposite it, staring at Argrave with curiosity as he waited for him to speak. Though Argrave briefly contemplated sitting in a chair, he saw its thin, shaky legs rotted out and decided against it. "That centaur getting away bodes ill," Argrave began, starting at the problem Orion had caused. "Centaurs, they're closer to man than beast, and they can communicate with our foes. He can report to the commanders of the other fortresses, or even the Plague Jester herself. You fear our enemies will take note of us? They already have. They harass us during this whole journey, brother." Orion stepped around the table. Argrave mirrored his brother's steps, circling around the table opposite him. "This is different. These beasts that assail as we travel. They sense intruders and hunt them, but little else. Now, you've displayed your power, stated your intent plainly. If the commanders are warned, the final assault will be all the more difficult. They'll group up." Orion lowered his head. "I apologize." Argrave sighed. "I don't get why this is happening. Back at camp, you lunged at Sylvic as though she were your nemesis without any provocation whatsoever. Now, someone attacks you first, And you let them stab you? You let their ally get away? I apologize, Orion repeated sincerely, lowering his head further. I don't want an apology. I want to know why, Argrave insisted. Orion raised a hand to the table before him, placing his fingers against it almost gingerly. The battle he'd just endured had destroyed both of his gauntlets, leaving only scraps of loosely hanging metal with broken enchantments behind. Do you ever grow lonely, Argrave? Orion raised his head, grey eyes emotionless. Argrave thought for half a second before answering, not lately. But I did, once. A lot. Orion brushed his fingers against the decrepit table, pushing it lightly and watching the thin wood bend and bounce back into place. I cannot grow lonely. I always have company. The gods accompany me through life. Since my birth, they have always been here. Argrave had grown rather less afraid of Orion lately, so he dared say, but that doesn't answer my question. Why do you act differently from how you did? Orion slammed his fist against the table and the wood buckled easily. Argrave didn't move an inch as wood splinters fell at his feet. Because I don't understand, Orion said, voice far too calm in the wake of his outburst. Argrave waited for an elaboration, and it came as Orion continued, I know the gods. My faith is unshakable. All is part of the natural order, and the world can only truly be perfect when their dominion extends from the tall mountains of Derika to the distant corners of the world. I have 98 parents, brother, my mother, our father, and all the gods of Vaska. Each and all taught me as much of the world as the other. And now, I go out into the world with their teachings in my mind, with the support of all my parents, both within and without. Orion clenched his fist. And I find that learning to do something is wholly different from putting it into action. The task is simple, spread the faith. Yet the ways are manifold, subtle and direct in equal turns. Each path I might take has its own application that excels at different points. You enlightened me to that, he pointed. Me? Argrave questioned. What? You abided heretics and enemies to help the faith in tremendous ways, Orion continued, stepping across the wrecked table to stand before Argrave. The people whisper of you staying an invasion from the Vadiamond by treating with them in their land. This action saved the lives of thousands of faithful in Mateth. What's more, Durin described your exploits against the foul heralds of Felhorn. All of this. I could never have done it. I don't understand it. Orion stepped away and put his hands on his hips. I am not particularly smart. I confess I am quite stupid. I have always been slow to read books, last to comprehend lectures. Though my instincts and will are second to none, and I have my parents at my back. I am impulsive, easily angered. Yet personality is not a static thing, and wisdom is more than equal to intelligence. Personality changes and morphs based on what happens. I am trying to understand, trying to grow, trying to learn from these experiences. I am trying to be a better faithful. Argrave stayed silent in the wake of Orion's openness. He had never seen Orion express anything of this sort to anyone, certainly never the player in Heroes of Berenda. Maybe it was because things had changed, or maybe it was because the two of them were family, and Orion trusted him easier. There will be better times in the future to try and learn, Argrave said gently. Right now, we have only allies and enemies. Even I am aware of that. Our foe seeks to genocide Vaska with disease and rot. Will you let that happen? Then what of that wetland spirit? Orion turned back. She is the enemy, yet you use her to help the faithful. You see? I cannot. Argrave felt conflicted. On the one hand, he felt some sympathy for Orion. From birth, he was molded and twisted into what he is now. He was a convergence of so many forces, stretched so thin by so many it was a wonder he was functional at all. If Argrave might teach him something to be a better person, shouldn't he take that opportunity? Yet the fact remained this: Orion's attempts to be a better person might sabotage their journey to cure plague. Millions could die if Orion continued to act indecisively as he had earlier. It would be tremendously stupid to prioritize Orion's personal growth over the fate of the continent. But then, the two weren't mutually exclusive, and Argrave could get more time if he got himself deeper involved with Orion. Argrave knew the words he needed to say to get that. He took a deep breath, battling with his desire to be disentangled from the man before him. Orion was dangerous. They had already become too closely bound for Argrave's liking. Yet that problem, when weighed with the consequences of failing their current task. I'll teach you, Argrave said quietly. When things are all done, I can help you with that. Experience, understanding, growth. He took a step forward, looking up at the prince. For now, put all of that out of your mind. The world needs you as you are, Orion. The world needs an unwavering crusader. We can work at more later, together. Though Orion seemed pleased by his vague offer and his empty assurances, Argrave was not entirely sure that things would resume their normal course. Nevertheless, the second day ended. Without a book to consume, Argrave was forced to relax and rest. He did not realize how much he needed such a thing until he had it. But once his mind had rejuvenated, he was consumed by feelings of impatience and frustration. He felt the need to do something, anything. As such, he and Annalise spent the remainder of the day talking. Argrave was coming to realize their relationship was strange. They seldom argued or fought, and their few disagreements were settled in less than minutes. Much of that was due to her. He suspected She understood him without him needing to say much at all. Argrave had recalled some people claiming that arguments and fights were the sign of a growing relationship. If they did not argue, it was uninteresting and pointless. Argrave supposed their life was interesting enough to make up for it and was content to let that festering worry die. On the morrow, Argrave rose with a headache not quite as severe as yesterday. The Wax Knights had better morale, having lost none of their own, and things were prepared in short order. The only truly miserable was Duran. I spend all night fretting and worrying about what Orion taught me, and then I get it right, he explained hollowly to Argrave as he adjusted his wyvern scale helmet. But then, he dumps just as much as I learned yesterday. You want my advice? Argrave began, then gave it before Duran could answer. Just keep asking him questions if you're uncertain. He'll surely be happy anytime. Duran shook his head. That man has no conception of personal boundaries, and you want me to spend more time with him? Argrave put a hand on the man's shoulder. When this is all over, I've got a plan for you. Something you'll like, if I know you right. And I do. I'm a different man, now. Duran shook his head, exaggeratedly harrowed. Barring that, they began the third day largely rejuvenated. And yet, it was not at all the same as the first and second days. Their travels began as normal, with Annalise scouting out a proper route to the fortress they intended to take their respite in before pressing onwards to deal with the plague jester. Once they began their travels, though, things remained eerily quiet. The only thing to assault them was leeches in the water, which the party did not often have genuine trouble with. The lack of assaults was a disquieting thing, and Argrave made sure to remain cautious with every step they took. No matter how paranoid Argrave remained, it did not prove warranted. Even the Wax Knights came to relax somewhat. Argrave thought it was important that his fears regarding the centaur had been realized, but he kept those thoughts to himself. The wetland trees, thick and alive with life earlier in their path, became twisted and stiff by the waxpox. They more resembled sculptures of rock made in the shape of trees after they had pressed deep enough. The water was thick with dead fish, dead bugs, dead everything. The abundant presence of the plague made Argrave ensure his companions drank potions to boost their immunity every few hours, and he kept checking to be sure their humorless masks were tight on their faces. As the stone of a distant fortress came into view shining like an anglerfish's light, Argrave once again spoke to his companions, ensuring they would know the plan for the battle well. Their role, just as it had been with the troubadour, was not to be so pivotal. It was precisely why he had been so insistent on correcting Orion's behavior. Yet as they pressed into the heart of the fortress, steeled for battle, the only thing that greeted them was a desolate place. Argrave felt an ambush might be waiting, and had people scour the place thoroughly. Yet no enemies came, not from within or without. Argrave stood in front of their warband of Wax Knights, Orion, a wetland spirit, and his own companions, each and all looking for direction. Argrave said grimly but loudly, "It seems that the worst may have come to pass, and victory has become all the more challenging." Chapter 199, Askew. We should press on as quickly as possible, even if we need to march through the night. Argrave spoke to Orion. The prince's grey-eyed gaze was stern and serious, freezing lesser men in place. "Do you believe so?" "Absolutely. The journey this time around was not so exhausting. Allowing the enemy an entire night to group up and prepare for our coming attack would be a disaster." Argrave nodded insistently. "My feet can tread for thousands of miles without issue," Orion said, staring him down. "Yet it is not myself I fear for. It is you and yours. Not all are blessed as I am." This speech is not spurred by arrogance, I assure you. I merely worry. Argrave put his hands to his hips and looked to the Wax Knights, and then his own companions in turn. He could not deny traveling so much with anemia weighing upon him had been utterly exhausting. And exhaustion alone was not the issue. They would need to endure a night march when the wetlands were at their coldest. This final stretch spanned the most distance. What's more, they face an undoubtedly difficult battle at its conclusion. "What do you think?" Argrave asked his companions. Annalise was the first to speak, saying in favor, strategically, "It is a good assumption that arriving early might make the following battle less insurmountable. If Argrave is correct, we will face the plague jester and more, even foes we've avoided thus far." Duran opened his mouth to speak, but Guilliman cut in. "I have no issue." Argrave thought Guilliman was reliable enough it was pointless for him to confirm that, but he still nodded in quiet satisfaction. Orion stepped past him, though, walking to stand before Guilliman. "Take off your helmet," Orion said. "I would look at you." Argrave felt some panic seize him. Had the prince noticed something amiss about his companion? The elven vampire wore a helmet that covered his eyes and the top of his head, yet the mouth was left exposed. Though Guilliman's teeth were not unexplainably large, it was still noticeable. Guilliman did nothing, and his white-eyed gaze turned to Argrave for command. "Take it off." Argrave nodded, preparing excuses in his head for any discrepancies Orion might have noticed. Guilliman removed his helm, and his white hair fell across his pale white skin. He fixed his hair with one gauntleted hand, then stared at Orion dispassionately. Orion put one hand on Guilliman's shoulder, just beside his neck, then said seriously, "You are an able protector, and steadfastly loyal." He looked back to Argrave. "When this is done, I must ensure you are better armored to protect my brother." He patted his shoulder, then turned away. Argrave raised his brow at the promise from the prince. He felt he was being yet deeper entangled with the holy fool, yet he could not balk at the promise from a royal of better armor. They still had artifacts comparable to the crown embedded in Guilliman's armor, if not vastly outmatching it. Their defensive capabilities, too, were much higher. "And you, Durin?" Orion spoke to him, causing a seemingly involuntarily flinch from the tribal. "Can you handle a night march?" "If you carry me, I might be able to sleep," Durin suggested. Argrave thought it was a joke and chuckled, but as he stared at Durin, he realized the man might be serious. Orion scratched beneath his beard. "Yet, it would be unfair to the others." "Clear it with them," Durin continued. "I'm sure they'll be fine with it." Durin's joking, Argrave cut in after some hesitation. "Considering there may be attacks, no one will be able to sleep." The former tribal looked at Argrave bitterly, then laughed. "I'm fine, a bit sore, but I've fought battles on less sleep. Once the adrenaline kicks in, none as fatal as this one promises to be," Argrave thought. "I know my men will be capable of this." Orion nodded. "And you, Argrave? We must not neglect you. Though you have grown broader, I still recall your many troubles with disease, broken bones. I would not have you kill yourself for the sake of this. If need be, I would face all of our enemies by my lonesome, drive them utterly into the earth, and, I'm a big boy." Argrave held out his hand to stifle Orion. "Then, there is no time for breaks, for rest. We must march." He looked to Sylvic. "Scout out the final path," he directed her, though the words were for Annalise. A simple stick waved in front of Elias' face, back and forth. "I cannot see it," Elias said. One hand covered his right eye, while the left eye was free and unblemished. He was shirtless presently, exposing a warrior's body. A large streak of waxpox had corrupted most of his forearm, some of his upper arm, while a single streak rose up his neck and consumed part of his face. One of his eyes had gone grey. Helmut, the spellcaster with abyssal purple eyes, stopped moving the stick in front of Elias' face. "Uncover your eye," he commanded, then set the stick down. Elias lowered his hand. "It's well and truly blind." Then Helmut nodded and stepped away, saying nothing. There was another in the room, a mage belonging to the Order of the Grey Owl. He was quite an old, portly man. "I've done all in my power to stop it from spreading to the brain," the spellcaster said. "But it still persists. This disease feeds on magic. Your power hastens its spread. It is truly a cursed thing." "Thank you. I appreciate Count Delbrun sending you to help." He took a deep breath and sighed, moving his one good eye about. "It'll never heal, will it?" Elias questioned. His tone was as though he was not discussing his own sight. "I suppose a spellcaster needs sight less than a warrior. It is a good thing I took the path I did, I suppose." "Even the princess of this nation remains blind," the spellcaster from Just informed Elias. "Broken bones, cuts, gouges. Easy enough to heal, as all that was there is still present. But severed limbs, rotted or gouged eyes?" The spellcaster shook his head. Elias nodded passively. "The riots are mostly suppressed by this point, and the people are cooperating. But I still have to keep moving, root out the corruption in this city. I promised as much to the people." Elias rose. "Let's go." Helmut put his hand to his temple, greatly frustrated. The focus of his frustration appeared to be himself. Nevertheless, he straightened and followed. Princess Eleanor of Vasca faced the three maids kneeling before her, her raw pink empty eye sockets hauntingly empty. She combed her long, obsidian hair back, styling it with practiced movements. She wore a black mourning dress that hid much of her pale, smooth skin. "If Undune won't return, something must be done," Eleanor mused. "If he is in Veden, whatever I order done will happen much slower." "Mina is his sole influence for staying, my princess," one of the maids counseled. "Yet if she is removed, Undune will take centuries to return to the capital. He is stubbornly committed to seeking vengeance on whatever deprived him of an amusement or a gain. Elbrail is proof enough of that." Eleanor shook her head. Mina, who visited Orion's camp for the sole purpose of speaking to Argrave. Mina, who is close friends to Nicoletta. She sighed ponderously, then set her hair down on the table before her. "You might leave the capital, my princess," another suggested. "You might manipulate things all the better, while allowing Undune to remain where he is." Eleanor turned her head a different direction as though her empty eye sockets still saw. "I cannot leave the greenhouse. I cannot disentangle from Dirica. King Felipe III has forbidden such a thing," she said, saying no words that hinted at genuine treason. "Well, even if it is a clumsy hand, I can think of no way to pull Undune away from his task without playing my hand overtly. Perhaps it is better this way. This plague is even more dangerous than the war, I suspect." She lowered her head. "Encourage Undune in his efforts to fight the plague," she finally directed, lifting her head up quickly and sharply. I believe that Argrave was not boasting when he organized his expedition into the wetlands. The strange spirit he pulled from the wetlands. The reports are too numerous and consistent to be fake. And Argrave, he worries you, my princess?" Eleanor tilted her head. "I think he knows, or at least suspects." Elaine's reports. "Suspects what?" The princess shifted in her chair. "Suspects me. What I do. What we do, here in this greenhouse." The maids looked between each other, Disquieted, Orion's royal knights all ceased giving me reports once I don't even know what he's done to them. Exactly. My informants say they are monsters. Regardless, things must be brought to a head. When Argrave returns, if he returns successfully, ill nor amended, Indune must be fully committed to solving this plague. Get him invested, get him involved. Make it feel important to him, special to him. All the while, subtly stroke his hatred towards Argrave. When Argrave is heralded as a savior, the one who fixed the problem Indune had been trying to desperately to solve. Well, I'm sure you know how my dear brother might react. I need instability. There is no better way to make it than with this. Chapter 200, Siege of the Palace. As far as Argrave was concerned, the primary difference between marching during the day and doing so was merely that they had not slept. At least, that was his opinion before they began it. Argrave was tired and felt a little clumsy, probably doubly so because of his anemia, and the cold water of the wetlands soaked into his bones. Spell light lit their path ably, and the boundary where Sylvik's protection ended was still as dark and unknowable as ever. They were unhurried on their march just as it had been during the day, a small blessing that spoke of ill fortune in their future. Though everyone present was hardy, tempered by battle and long journeys both, it was an unprecedentedly exhausting thing. The wetland spirit Sylvik had been consumed by the waxpox more and more as their journey progressed, just as it had been in the game. Their boundary of protection grew weaker as she did so, and the splendor of the liquid light humming within her wooden body died by the hour. Considering Orion's recent changes, he did not know if her death was certain anymore, nor did he know if the plague jester's death was certain. Hopefully his words got through to Orion. Nonetheless, they marched ever onward. The waters thinned as they did, and instead of wading through thick puddles, they stepped through no more than wet mud. The waxpox thrived here, stronger than ever. The rotted plants and trees all took on a taupe tone, accented by red. It was as though they walked through a forest of flesh and blood, and once the idea took root, it was nearly accurate enough to make Argrave nauseous. Yet that did not last forever. In time, Argrave saw the ever-present mist around fade away, and the wetlands ahead were revealed in earnest. Stone roads were paved into the mud, each and all so uniform they were likely made by mages. None were complete, though, most either buried in mud or abruptly ending. They all led to the same point, a towering complex of buildings, dimly lit by the burgeoning light of dawn. A beautiful palace rose up out of the wetlands, so impeccably preserved most might think it an illusion. Its walls of gaudy marble and gold still stood strong, nearly 50 feet tall. Spikes and statues of silver stood on the walls, each and all monuments to great warriors or mages. It had a central gate with a breathtaking archway, just over which the largest statue stood. It was a golden statue of King Felipe III, at a time when he was perhaps 30 at most. A near black polished granite pathway began at the central gate, stretching all the way back to the main palace. The courtyard beyond had an impeccably maintained garden, where the plants bloomed splendidly even now. Elaborate water fountains dotted small pavilions. All of it radiated luxury and decadence, persisting amidst the harsh wetlands which had become a wasteland of death, rot, and despair as if a mockery to it all. This was the palace of the Archduke. Orion stepped forward, gazing up at it. Everyone else nearly doubled over in exhaustion. Built after my father's first war, and given to Archduke Regine, his brother. He looked back to Argrave. My uncle. His children. Have they all died? You'll learn their fates soon enough, Argrave wished to say, but he nodded, still breathless. Orion nodded, then looked back, examining each statue. They conquered this land with a pledge to weed heretics, to spread the faith. Yet they built statues of men and women, warriors and spellcasters. This was a palace for the Archduke Regine, not a temple for the gods, Argrave pointed out, finally catching his breath. Orion did not answer. His gaze wandered the walls, the towers, and the distant main building. The gate is open, Orion said slowly. The walls are unmanned. Argrave had noticed the same things, but the statues standing on the marble battlements made it seem as though they confronted a fortress manned by giants and gods. Maybe that was true, in part. We proceed carefully, lest more arrive. Argrave looked around slowly. We'll know what we're facing before we face it. Sylvik. He turned, though his gaze landed on Annalise. She nodded, and he held her steady as she took control of her druidic bond. Minutes passed as Argrave waited, and Sylvik acted as though she was scouting. Then, suddenly, Annalise took a deep breath and grabbed out. Argrave caught her arm and said, "You all right?" The bird fluttered back to her shoulder, but Annalise took a moment, hand held near her heart as though to calm its throbbing. "Just tired," she said, not rejecting his support. "And there. The jester. I saw her face. I have never experienced such absolute hatred." Argrave had not experienced what she had, but he shuddered when he heard her say those words. After giving her a reassuring squeeze, he asked, "Did you manage to scout?" Even still, she nodded, then stepped away to speak to Sylvik to relay the information. As Argrave feared, the enemy had rallied here. Even now, they hid in the walls and in the outer buildings, waiting to ambush them once they entered the palace. Prudent, considering a mere gate could not bar them from the palace walls for long and the animals they led could not manage sophisticated commands. Two of the plague jester's servants had made it here, it seemed, The Bard and the Jungle. They were not staying by the side of the Plague Jester, but rather took the east and west wall respectively, likely to ambush them from behind if they proceeded too far in. The Centaur was absent. Given his speed, Argrave supposed he was off gathering the more distant reinforcements. All the more reason to hurry. The Jester waited in the Archduke's throne room. If Ryan decided to stick around and help them deal with the two servants of the Jester that were formerly manning their fortresses, he couldn't say for sure the Jester would not come out of the throne room and attack them. Orion needed to isolate them from the Plague Jester. She was so potent that merely being in the crossfire might mean death. Yet if Orion fought the whole force alone, even he might die. Hell, if the whole bulk of their enemies rushed out and attacked their party, they'd probably succumb then and there. But the Jester didn't seem to be confident in that. She was not aware of her inherent advantage, so she waited. The troops she led could not handle tasks like scouting, and complex strategies were off the table. One small fortune in this miserable situation. Argrave saw only one option in all of this. They would need to face the Bard and Jungle, while Orion dealt with the Jester alone. That meant they'd need to fight two bosses that Orion typically dealt with, alongside a vast horde of the same harrowing opponents they'd encountered in the wetlands. Worse yet, they need to do things quickly, so as to avoid confronting more foes coming in from behind as reinforcements. The Plague Jester was only a shaman empowered by a wetland spirit, not a strategist. The fact that she had divided her forces in this manner demonstrated that, even if she knew she held the advantage, which was dubious, Argrave wasn't certain she'd be able to capitalize on that. This formation of hers was crudely effective and relied on their party proceeding in ignorance. Yet Argrave was not stupid enough to brute force things, relying on his blessing of supersession. Their opponent had employed their strategy and ostensibly held the advantage, but they had tremendous knowledge of their opponent. Argrave, Guilliman, and Annalise discussed the matter in great detail, all the others standing by as counsel. They worked to dismantle the coming battle piece by piece. Orion led them all into the palace of the Archduke, his wax knights supporting him from behind in a compact and orderly formation. Argrave and his party followed, too, just behind the royal knights serving Orion. He was certain all of them were being watched. The enemy was prepared to jump out in ambush once they moved to deal with the Plague Jester. Once they reached a certain point, Sylvik broke away from the party, weaving into a pavilion overflowing with plants. Her presence disappeared into the well-maintained gardens in seconds, and none of their party betrayed that she had even left by giving a reaction. Just after, they reached the central square of the palace, where the path branched to the east and west, or continued north straight to the gargantuan main palace. The wax knights halted. Orion looked back and nodded to Argrave. "Don't forget, Orion, no compromises," he called out, hoping to ensure things would go well. "I will defeat the enemy," he agreed, then turned towards the main palace, rushing upwards towards the stairs. The wax knights turned east and rushed just as Orion did. Argrave and Guilliman moved towards some of the buildings arrayed against the wall, while Annalise and Durin followed after the wax knights. "Be careful," Annalise whispered to Argrave before she left. "Don't worry, I like living," Argrave returned. "I'd like you to live more. Be more careful than you want me to be," he called as she left. Like that, they parted, her white hair shrouded as she pulled up the hood of her duster to better protect from stray assaults. Their strategy hinged on two principles. The first was that they would need to defeat the two powerful enemies as quickly as possible so as to avoid being attacked by two opponents far beyond them. The second principle would be to use the chaos caused by undermining the enemy's strategy to dismantle them. Argrave felt confident their plan was the best they had. He'd taken everything he could into consideration, especially the personalities of the Bard and Jungle. He wasn't confident in success, though, and being separated from two of his companions made him more nervous than he cared to admit. He channeled Guilliman's steadfastness, moving into one of the buildings of the palace with the elven vampire just beside him. They walked into a simple, two-story building. At once, the place was filled with rancorous whoos, and the gibbons that had plagued them during their journey came flooding out of the basement and the second story, swinging atop the rafters towards Guilliman and Argrave. The uproar set the whole palace alive just outside. Argrave conjured a ward with his enchanted ring, yet angled it precisely so it stemmed the tide rather than stopping it altogether. With the number of foes lessened for but a moment, Guilliman danced past the gibbon sticks pulsing with liquid light, dispatching one after another. Argrave conjured electric eels, while his companion did his work, searching for an opening. They were overwhelmed for but a moment, and Guilliman shielded Argrave with his body. He took harsh, bone-breaking blows, but delivering a swing of his great sword in response so powerful it clove through two foes. After, Argrave split his electric eels into a deadly surge, dispatching near a dozen of the gibbons. This small assault chipped away much of his magic. He still had enough to do what needed to be done. Second floor, Argrave directed, breathing steady as Guilliman finished off the last gibbon. They should be fighting the Bard by now. Guilliman nodded as he drained blood from one of his flasks, and then the two of them raced up the stairs. One gibbon had waited in ambush, but Guilliman slammed his sword's pommel into its face before it could even swing. After it fell, he stomped on its neck, dispatching it. There was a large bay window on the second floor, overlooking much of the palace grounds. Specifically, Argrave could see where Annalise, Darren, and the Wax Knights confronted a tide of chimera-esque sentinels, and the animals of the wetlands that had so plagued them during their journey. After looked around, he spotted a pink flower on one of the well-maintained hedges. Sylvig is in place, he concluded. Argrave took a deep breath to steady himself, then said, "Guess we wait for our grand entrance." "I'll make sure you're safe," Guilliman nodded. Argrave held his hands out. The B-rank matrix of blood-flood bow took form, and a recurve bow of dark blood took shape in his hands. He cast another spell, and his Brahmasnas finally came out, stepping up to defend him alongside Guilliman. "Not sure I can be safe," Argrave concluded, blood dripping from his other hand as the arrow took shape. If you like this audiobook, subscribe the channel for more videos like this. And join my Patreon if you want to support me, where you can find the complete collection Jackal Among Snakes audiobooks. Hurry up, what are you waiting for? Leave some comment and let me know if you guys like this story, or you have a web novel you like and want to hear its audiobook. I will be happy to create them for you. Please like, share, and leave a comment on the video.